Every fan of Tombstone can quote the movie in their sleep. They know the mustaches, they know the coats, they know the walk down the street before the gunfight at the OK Corral, and they know the line about being somebody's huckleberry. What almost nobody knows is that one of the quietest, toughest men in that cast spent years carrying a secret about how the film actually got made, and about a version of it that the world never saw. That man was Sam Elliott, the actor who played Virgil Earp, and what he understood about Tombstone changes the way you watch every single scene. To understand what Elliott was protecting, you have to go back to a moment when the Western was considered a dead genre in Hollywood. By the early 90s, audiences had moved on. Studios weren't interested, and cowboy pictures were treated like a relic from your grandfather's generation. Into that unfriendly climate walked a young screenwriter named Kevin Jarre, fresh off writing the acclaimed Civil War drama Glory. Jarre wasn't just interested in writing another shoot-'em-up. He wanted to build something enormous, a sprawling, novelistic account of Wyatt Earp, his brothers, Doc Holliday, in the town of Tombstone, Arizona, filled with historical detail, texture, and slow-burning character work. The script he produced was so rich that it pulled in an almost absurd collection of talent. Kurt Russell as Wyatt, Val Kilmer as Doc, Sam Elliott as Virgil, Bill Paxton as Morgan, along with Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Stephen Lang, and Billy Bob Thornton rounding out the cast, with the legendary Robert Mitchum brought in to narrate. What most casual viewers never learn is that Kevin Jarre wasn't simply the writer of Tombstone. He was hired to direct it as well, and this was going to be his very first time behind the camera on a major production. Jarre poured himself into authenticity in a way that bordered on obsession. He insisted the entire cast grow their own period-accurate mustaches, styled and waxed to match photographs from the 1880s, and the actors leaned into it, treating their facial hair almost like a uniform, a shared symbol that they were part of something serious and true to history. That devotion to detail is part of what made the original script so beloved among the people who signed on. They weren't just there to make another cowboy movie. They believed they were making the definitive telling of the Earp story. Unfortunately, believing in a vision and being able to execute it on a chaotic film set are two very different things. Jarre, brilliant as he was on the page, struggled badly once cameras started rolling. Coordinating horses, extras, gunfights, and a massive ensemble cast proved to be a completely different challenge than sitting alone with a typewriter. He reportedly wanted to shoot with the patient, painterly styled directors like John Ford, framing wide, beautiful compositions. But the production simply didn't have the time or money for that kind of pace. Within about a month, he had fallen so far behind schedule that producer Andy Vajna made the difficult decision to remove him from the project entirely. At that point, the film was in genuine danger of collapsing. A production with no director, a half-finished shoot, restless actors, and a shrinking budget is usually a production that gets shut down. But that didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen is the first piece of secret that connects directly to Sam Elliott. Studio executives brought in George P. Cosmatos, a director best known for big, muscular action pictures like Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Cobra, to finish the film. For more than a decade afterward, the official story was simple. Cosmatos directed Tombstone. His name sat right there in the credits. Then, years later, Kurt Russell gave an interview to True West magazine that turned that story upside down. According to Russell, he was the one who had personally gone out and secured roughly $25 million in financing to get the movie made in the first place, putting his own name and reputation on the line to keep it alive. When Jarre was fired, producers actually asked Russell to step in as the official director. He declined the credit. He didn't want his name attached as director. Instead, he suggested bringing in Cosmatos as what Russell later called a frontman, someone who would appear on set each day and run things publicly while Russell quietly built the plan behind the scenes. Every night, Russell would go to Cosmatos' room and hand him a shot list for the next day's filming. The following morning, Cosmatos would walk onto set and direct exactly what Russell had already worked out the evening before. Russell promised Cosmatos he would never reveal the arrangement while the man was alive, and he kept that promise for years, only telling the story publicly after Cosmatos passed away in 2005. It's worth noting the idea to bring in Cosmatos in the first place reportedly came from Sylvester Stallone, who had worked with him before. This arrangement matters enormously for understanding Sam Elliott's role in the story, Because once the film's biggest star was quietly steering production, he also had the power to reshape the script itself. And reshape it he did. Kurt Russell looked at Kevin Jarre's original screenplay and came to a hard conclusion. It was simply too big. There wasn't enough time or money left to shoot everything Jarre had written. So along with producer James Jacks, Russell began cutting. Reports suggest roughly 30 pages came out of the screenplay. Entire subplots disappeared. Supporting characters played by actors like Billy Zane and Jason Priestley, who had substantial arcs in the original draft, were reduced to brief appearances. Even the Earp Vendetta ride, one of the most sweeping sections of Jarre's script, was compressed down into something closer to a montage. Russell's reasoning was that the film needed a single, powerful emotional through line, and he chose to build around the bond between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, a friendship he later described as one of the great love stories of American film, unspoken and fierce and loyal in equal measure. To sharpen that relationship, he believed everything surrounding it needed to shrink. To his credit, Russell didn't spare his own role from the trimming. He reportedly urged Jarre, who was still reworking pages during the chaos, to hand lines away to other characters rather than protect his own screen time. He wanted an ensemble picture, not a star vehicle. Val Kilmer, famously, told Russell he could cut as many of Doc Holliday's lines as he wanted, confident that his performance would dominate the screen no matter how little dialogue he had left. Powers Booth, Bill Paxton, and the rest of the cast largely went along with the sacrifices, giving up material in the brutal Arizona heat to keep the production moving forward. Nearly everyone accepted the trims. One man refused, and that refusal is where the real story of Sam Elliott begins. Elliott, playing the older, more morally grounded brother Virgil Earp, drew a line that nobody on set forgot. While other actors were offering up their own dialogue without complaint, Elliott made it clear that if a single word of his part was cut, there would be serious consequences, delivering a warning blunt enough that people still talk about it decades later. He was the only principal actor who flatly refused to give up material. It would be easy to write that off as an actor's ego, a diva moment on a stressed-out set. But that reading misses what was actually happening. Elliott wasn't fighting for more screen time out of vanity. He was fighting because he had read Kevin Jarre's full, unedited screenplay, and he believed it was one of the finest scripts he had ever encountered. In an interview given while the film was still fresh in 1993, Elliott said as much directly, calling the original screenplay one of the best he'd ever read. Then he said something far more striking. If he had been handed the script in condensed, trimmed-down form that eventually became the released film, he wouldn't have signed on at all. The man behind one of the most beloved performances in the movie believed the final cut was a diminished version of something much greater. Elliott talked about the cuts ripping out what he called the connective tissue of the story, the quieter character beats and slower stretches that gave the Earps and the town around them real depth. Roughly 30 pages of that material vanished in the rush to finish the film, and Virgil was one of the characters most affected. In Jarre's original vision, Virgil functioned as a true moral center of the family, the brother whose conviction pushes the others toward finally standing up and enforcing the law. Much of the material that built that portrait, scene by scene, ended up on the cutting room floor before it was ever filmed. So when Elliott planted his feet and refused to lose any more of his dialogue, he wasn't just protecting lines on a page. He was protecting the last remaining fragments of a fuller, richer character, and of a movie he had genuinely fallen in love with the first time he read it. That tension between Russell's instinct to strip the story down to its emotional core and Elliott's fight to preserve Jarre's sprawling original design runs underneath every single scene of the finished film, even if audiences never noticed it. And Elliott wasn't alone in mourning what got left behind. Kurt Russell himself, the very person who made most of the cuts, has spent decades thinking about what might have been. In that same True West interview, Russell described Jarre's original, uncut version of the story as nothing less than a Western Godfather, insisting that's genuinely how different in scale and ambition it would compare to what audiences eventually saw. Stephen Lang, who played villain Ike Clanton, backed up that comparison, describing Jarre's script as essentially The Godfather relocated to 1880s Arizona and praising just how good it was. Think about what that means. Several of the people who actually made Tombstone believe there was a film on the level of one of the greatest movies ever produced buried somewhere inside that production, and circumstances beyond their control, a fired director, a shrinking budget, a runaway schedule, kept it from ever reaching the screen. That regret hasn't faded with time. Decades after the film's release, Russell has continued to say publicly that he's never fully made peace with how things turned out, admitting the movie could have been even better than what was ultimately delivered. This is a man attached to one of the most beloved westerns of the modern era, and he still can't watch it without thinking about the version that got away. According to Russell, footage from that larger, unfinished vision may still exist somewhere, and use reels sitting in storage. And for years, fans have hoped for some kind of extended cut that restores Jar's original design. Russell has floated the idea of revisiting his old notes, and even recalled a specific and used scene, a hospital conversation between Wyatt and Doc, that never made it into the film. So far, none of it has materialized. The bigger, richer Tombstone remains locked away, exactly the outcome Sam Elliott feared when he dug in his heels all those years ago. Once you understand how close the whole production came to falling apart, the near misses start to feel almost unbelievable. The role of Doc Holliday, the part that turned Val Kilmer into a legend, was originally intended for Willem Dafoe, and the only reason that casting fell through a studio nervousness tied to controversy surrounding one of Dafoe's earlier films. Producer Andy Vajna also floated a wildly different pairing at one point, asking Kurt Russell whether he considered playing Doc Holliday himself, with Richard Gere stepping into the role of Wyatt Earp. Picture that combination for a moment, and imagine how differently the chemistry in the entire film would have played out. On top of all that internal chaos, Tombstone was racing against a competing Wyatt Earp movie being developed at the same time, with reports that the rival production tried to pressure studios and even cornered the mark on authentic period costumes, forcing the Tombstone team to source their wardrobe from overseas. Despite every obstacle, Tombstone opened at Christmas in 1993 and became one of the highest-grossing westerns of its era, while the competing, more expansive rival picture underperformed by comparison. The leaner, tighter, faster-paced Tombstone is the one audiences fell in love with, and that's the real irony sitting at the center of this entire story. The very cuts that devastated Sam Elliott may be part of what made the film a hit. Russell's instinct to focus everything around the bond between Wyatt and Doc gave the movie momentum, quotability, and rewatchability that a longer, more sprawling version might never have achieved. So who was right? The star who trimmed the story down to its beating heart, or the actor who fought to preserve its full, sprawling soul? Maybe the truest answer is that they both were. The Tombstone audiences actually got as tight, thrilling, and endlessly quotable, a film that never lets you check your watch. And that's a direct result of Russell's ruthless editing instincts. Without those cuts, there's a real chance the production never finishes at all, or limps into theaters as an unwieldy mess nobody remembers today. But the fuller version, the one that still haunts the people who made it, might have been something even bigger, a genuine epic on the scale the films it's still being compared to. And that's exactly what Sam Elliott was trying to say when he refused to give up a single line. He had held Kevin Jar's original pages in his hands. He knew the connective tissue that existed before it was cut away, the quiet character work that let these legendary figures breathe between the gunfights. He knew what was written into those missing pages, and he understood that once they disappeared, they were gone for good. That's the piece of the story most fans have never pieced together. When you watch Tombstone today, you aren't watching a complete, untouched vision. You're watching the surviving wreckage of something even more ambitious, held together by a movie star who secretly ran the production, and by a cast willing to sacrifice their own material to save it. Every unforgettable line in that film survived a process that could easily have erased it. And somewhere, according to the very people who made it, the rest of that story is still sitting in the dark, waiting.